Hello, everybody. This is Steve McKeon.
And this is Lupe Munoz.
Welcome to the Leadership Exchange. Today, we're going to continue on with some of the conversation that we started during the last podcast around Lencioni's book, Five Dysfunctions of a Team. Like we always do, we like to start this off with a story. So, Lupe, I'm going to throw it over to you. Why don't you lead in with a story?
This story relates to the book because part of the triangle or the pyramid, if everyone recalls from the last episode, we talked about commitment. The question I have is, okay, commitment to what or to whom? The story is around, I joined a team and it became evident to me that every supervisor was very loyal and very committed to their specific team. So those people that directly reported to them. And there is some positive there, but the problem was they were committed to their team to a fault. And that is what they talk about in Lencioni's book around, hey, you've got to be committed to the team that you're part of as peers. And you can't choose to be more committed to your direct reports than it is to the team that you're peers for. And the explanation is that if you're not able to do that, then there's always going to be mistrust because you don't have the team that you're part of, your peers. You don't have their best interest in mind. You have your other team's best interest in mind, the direct reports. The situation is that there was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of friction between the supervisors because they wanted to protect their team. They wanted to support their team. They perceived that, hey, if I admit that my team's doing something wrong, then I'm not supporting them. I'm not committed and I'm not loyal to them. So I had to sit down and talk to the team around that piece around like, hey, what or who should we be loyal to? Who should we be committed to? What should we be committed to? And there were a lot of answers. There was like, well, the company, well, my team, well, my boss, well, my buddies. And so that you can see where there's an endless list of who you should be committed to. And so I think the topic is worth expanding on specifically for, some of our listeners around, okay, how do you balance that? Because there's probably a balance, but you can't have the balance be that you're sacrificing the relationship you have with your peers as a leadership team in order to meet the needs of your team. And when there is a decision to be made, my advice would be you've got to kind of look at the bigger picture and say, what's the best thing for the company? What's the best thing for our culture? We have values. We have a vision. Those should help guide me as to what is the right decision versus defaulting to one or the other sometimes can be a problem. Steve?
Yeah, those are all great stories, Lupe, and all really good examples. I had a lot of memories going through my mind of situations similar to what you've described. You talked about the commitment and the details around the lack of commitment or overcommitting in some cases to a certain group quickly erodes the trust of a team. And when it's peer to peer, it's even more impactful to where, you start to see, let's say there's 5 managers or supervisors on a team, and one of them is continually falling back down into, just a what I call a silo focus on the one group of direct reports that they have. And being a servant leader is definitely about supporting those folks, but it's also about understanding the bigger picture, right? That you've signed up for in that leadership role, and that with your other peers, you're going to start working on things to improve the team and really start to work towards, some specific results, accountability for activities and also accountability for results in the organization. And, without that commitment at that level, it's just really hard for any team to advance. And, it reminds me of, several people that ended up leaving an organization because they just couldn't find their way in that environment to, really partner in the way that they were needed, where they partner in the way they needed to partner. So,
Yep.
that lack of commitment.
To recap for listeners who may not have the triangle right in front of them, the one from the book, the pyramid or triangle has trust on the bottom, has conflict above it, and then commitment and accountability, and then at the very top, results. And so those are the 5 dysfunctions, if you will, that Lencioni mentions in the book, in the story of the book. And you're absolutely right, Steve, that you got to have commitment. And the commitment, an example in the book is like, hey, we have a leadership meeting. Let's say, Steve, you and I are part of a leadership team. We're peers. And we talk about something. And then the next chance I get after the meeting, I go and talk to the team about some maybe sensitive information. Or maybe you didn't look so good, and I'm over here talking to the team. Oh, you should have seen Steve. He was terrible. That type of behavior is working against that commitment part when it comes to the team that Steve and I are on. And so that's a really great example of how, like, well, I want to be close to my team, and so I want to be transparent and share with them, but it's costing my peer something, as far as their reputation, as far as their credibility, et cetera. I think that's a really important thing for people to understand, that would be a very destructive behavior if it goes unchecked.
Yeah. And, each of those elements that you talked about, Lupe, trust, managing conflict, healthy conflict, the commitment piece, are really foundational pieces of work that starts with holding yourself accountable so you can then hold others accountable. And I think, the old, adage of, hey, walk in my shoes is really, let me walk in their shoes as well. And then, through that effort, I'll be able to understand a little bit more about what's needed. You still want to be one of the guys, right? You want to be one of the gang. And it really catches up to you sometimes when you can't separate. Lupe, let me ask you a question. Let's talk a little bit about these 4 levels and how does that build into results that Lencioni talks about in both the dysfunctions of teams, but also overcoming those dysfunctions. What results is he referring to?
Well, the overall results in the book, it's a company. And so the company's not doing super great. They're actually in trouble. They're not doing well. And there's a line in the book that talks about, we've got the best talent, we have the best technology, we have the best resources, but we're not the best company out there. Our competitors are beating us. The lesson from the book is that it's critical that you have a well-functioning team. You can have all the best equipment, you can have all the best resources, but in the end, it comes down to people. And in this case, it comes down to leadership and a team working together and cohesive. Because remember the speech that Simon Sinek has given in the past. It's on YouTube. It's lots of places you can get it right now. He talks about the circle of safety, and he says, "Hey, if you don't feel like you're in that circle of safety, then you're spending a lot of time trying to defend yourself against your own team, the people within the circle. You've got plenty of things outside the circle that you have to deal with. So if you can't trust each other and feel safe with each other, then that is taken away from your focus to the outside world. So in this case would be like the competitor. So the team was so dysfunctional with these deep behaviors that they were not effective with all those resources. They were not effective with all that technology, et cetera. And in the end, the story in the book tells you that some really tough decisions are made to change the team's culture, that specific team's culture, the leadership team. But they were necessary because they would not have been effective without making changes with their behavior. And so it talks about how they made changes and some of the really great discussions. I've had several teams that go through this book and we read it and we talk through it and how it reflects what we've dealt with or our situations. The team that I was talking to you about, they started understanding this.
Mm-hmm.
They started realizing what it was doing to our team. And, people that weren't really voicing their opinion as strongly in the past now had the courage to do so, and everyone else listened. And so there was a lot better discussion and dialogue around decisions. And more importantly, there was more of a commitment on those decisions as a team because of the fact that they were able to talk through it. And a lot of people feel very comfortable. Like they're like, well, anytime we're disagreeing strongly, that's an uncomfortable situation. I want to avoid that. And that is not what we need to do. It doesn't have to be a knockdown, throw the furniture type of disagreement. It can just be a disagreement around, this is my opinion, this is why I think it, and this is why I think this is the best way to go. And then everyone else having the same opportunity in the end, coming to some group or a team decision.
And I heard a couple different things, that, you were referencing. And I think an underlying theme of a lot of that is that when people focus on their own goals instead of those as a team, the chance of achieving results, the team results, goals, and objectives is really compromised. And so I think to where you started, understanding the commitment to your peers in your organizations as a leader, and making sure that trust is in play, and that you're not afraid of conflict. Because the other thing I think that can really get in the way of getting results, Lupe, as you and I have witnessed in our own careers, when leaders cannot have a conversation with each other about their organization, or even being more transparent what difficulties they're having within their organization. And while it may not seem like direct conflict, the fact of not being open to receive, maybe some feedback or some guidance in that space is really part of the same, issue of, wanting to avoid conflict, wanting to avoid those difficult conversations. So it happens at multiple levels, right? So it can happen at supervisor to team. It can happen team to team. It can happen peer to peer, in leadership, supervisor, manager, and then also up in the organization, right? Being afraid to, or that circle of safety of being able to communicate up into the organization. Hey, this is our challenge right now. I really would like to get, your help. Because I think the other thing, especially when you're a new leader, is not being afraid to ask for help. And we don't expect you to know everything. Even to this day, I can think of 3 times in the last 2 months that I've reached out to senior leaders and said, hey, I need your team's support with these programs, because there's no way myself or the team that I lead could do all these things. We need support. And so, finding that courage to have those conversations is really part of that whole dynamics that Lencioni talks about. And the ability to achieve results on team's behalf is, tied into a lot of that.
Staying on the same story that I was started with here, I knew there was progress when I really took a look and thought of like the start of when I joined the team, and then as the team started to evolve and those leaders started to become a cohesive team in addressing some of those dysfunctions. Because when I first got there, if a team struggled, let's say a shift struggled or a department struggled, there was no thinking that they could get help from anyone, or that you would ever help them. Like, hey, that man, it sucks to be you. Versus later on, it's like, hey, we're really struggling. Do you have any resources you could help us with? I don't know what your work day is like today for your crew, but if there's any way you can help me. Or in even the best case scenario was one leader heard the other leader group was struggling. They didn't have enough people to get done what needed to get done that day. That leader said, hey, you know what? I've got a few people that aren't super busy today. We can put off what they were going to do to come help you. That is a great behavior that tells you that you're making some progress and teams are thinking of the bigger picture instead of just me and mine. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I took out of the book when I first read it many years ago. I feel like a lot of teams are starting to realize how dysfunctional that can be and how it limits the overall success of the bigger team.
Yeah, that's really good information and definitely insight, and great to hear that team you were able to see that opportunity for improvement and change. And it's always really rewarding as a leader to see an organization recognize and overcome those challenges that they have. Lupe, one of the things I just want to comment on, your performance and work out there is because I think that a lot of the things you do for your teams really kind of lend themselves and set the stage to create that right environment of trust. And it really starts with you sharing a personal story about yourself in one-on-one meetings with individuals, just getting to know them. And a personal story is just, hey, here's my family, right? It's nothing that has to be so much deeper, but just letting people, get to know who you are, is really critical for a leader. Budgeting and taking the time. And the reason I bring that up is because I think, again, in order for you to be able to achieve the results as a leader with your team and yourself, is you've got to really have that open, direct line of communication, right? So that as the opportunities come up around positive conflict resolution, when there's a need to hold folks accountable, it just becomes a lot easier. And one of the other things that you do really well is every year you get your teams together and you revisit goal statement and you revisit the values and you revisit who your team wants to be viewed as. And so I think through those activities, it really gives both the leadership and also the team members that opportunity to, really be part of this functioning team at the high performance work team level that avoids some of the pitfalls. But I just want to point out, if you didn't go back and do that every year, the chance of it being maintained and sustained over time will go out the door. And I think you and I actually saw an example of that where an organization that we both, knew and recognized had stopped doing some of those activities. They kind of backed out of some of their commitments, and that leader standard work, went away. And as a result, we saw for ourselves firsthand just complete kind of backsliding of progress. And so, how I think as you transition and build new teams, how you set the stage and create that environment and just, let people understand the importance of those little things that really turn out to be big, monumental things for an organization. And we've also seen, both of us in our previous job roles, where a lot of those things that we did put in place are still there. And guess what? Those teams, those organizations continue to be, some of the best in class out there. And so I can't emphasize that enough, is that it all, when you can build teams and understand, these 5 points that Lencioni talks about, you can really create the legacy environment that is going to last long beyond the time you're with that
You're right,
team.
Steve. And it's all about culture. In the end, culture is the base. And what you talked about a little bit there, as far as a leader building trust, is showing that vulnerability, right? Part of the process, I feel, is as a leader, is you need to share of yourself, get people to know you, not just be some suit, so to speak. Have a personality, get to know you, but be vulnerable, right? Not just get to know you, hey, I've got this many kids, et cetera, but also, hey, share, these are some things I'm not that great at, but I'm working at. I try to manage these opportunities that I have. And sharing of yourself, sharing some of the things that you may experience is very helpful. And that vulnerability allows people to get to trusting you better in a much deeper sense. I think that's part of the lesson that Lencioni was trying to come through on his book also.
The other thing I just want to point out is when you're able to do those things, it becomes fun for the organization. People are enjoying the work they're doing. And a lot of times when we're talking about leadership and, developing ourselves as leaders, it's pretty sobering conversation because you're taking a hard look in the mirror. You're got your academic mind on as you're trying to learn. But I think the other key thing, and just want to call out some of the work practice you have, is the ability to keep things fun, right? And, have a laugh throughout the day. And even when, the issues come up, making sure that team members know that, yeah, we're really disappointed that this thing happened, but it's not directed at any one individual, right?
Yeah.
It's what happened in that process that we need to look at first. And at the end of the day, it may come down to a wrong decision made, but again, that's still, can we create a better environment where that decision is not likely to be wrong again, right? So, is it just some additional education, those type of things? So I just want to call those things out because there's a lot of very practical things that you can do and a lot of stuff we've talked about on this podcast in the realm of servant leadership and managing in that model that can really, help you maintain a very functional, hardworking team and people enjoying their job.
I think those are all great points. I think we're out of time here. We're going to call it a wrap. For those of you listeners out there, thanks for spending time with us. We look forward to the next topic. My name is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon, and this is the Leadership Exchange.
Everyone have a great day.